Dr. John Torres, Dr. John here with NBC News on his Facebook Live, where I cover headlines you've probably heard over the last few days. Get behind the headlines so you have a better understanding of, number one, what they mean, but number two, probably more importantly, what it means for you, your family, your loved ones, and your community, and how you can use that news to hopefully improve the pandemic in your lives and what you can do to stay safe. So we'll cover some headlines, and then I go to questions that you have. You guys always have great questions. Please send us questions if you have any. I'll try to get to as many of those as I can. But first and foremost, Colorado, that's where I'm based out of right now. Over the weekend, we were in the 80s and 90s. And just to let you know, what's happening in Colorado right now is today we're in the 30s, expecting 6 to 9 inches of snow. So it depends on what part of the state you're in. But that's typical Colorado. By the end of the week, we'll be back up into the 60s. But I think summer has passed. And because summer has passed, we've gone through Labor Day. This is the unofficial start of the fall. The official start isn't until later in the month. But there are some implications for you and what that means for you and your family. But first, let's start off talking about the flu vaccine, the coronavirus vaccine and what's happening there. Well, right now, the big issue has been this emergency use authorization. As I explained last time, there's a difference between emergency use authorization, which is what the FDA can do in an emergency like a pandemic. What they do here is they use a less strict criteria to get these vaccines authorized so they can start being used in the public. What that means is the benefit of the vaccine is more than the risk you get from the vaccine, and the risk from the coronavirus is high enough to where they want to go ahead and push this forward. Doesn't mean that it's unsafe. It just means that they're using a little less strict criteria than an approval, which an approval cannot really be reversed. The EUA, the authorization, can be reversed once the pandemic's under control. So what they're saying is we're going to start looking at these vaccines under the emergency use authorization statute to make sure that, number one, it's safe and effective enough to where it basically can benefit us over coronavirus, which we know has a death rate, which we know has a complication rate associated with it, and there's no cure at this point. So what's happening, though, is it's being taken to the point where a lot of people are concerned about what's happening with this emergency use authorization, mainly because of things you've heard in the news about possibly getting this by October, maybe November, maybe by the end of the year, depending on who you're listening to. What a lot of experts are saying is, that's possible, but it's not probable. More than likely, we're still talking next year. But if you get it earlier than that, people are going to start questioning it, saying, is this safe enough? Should I get it? And that's where that vaccine hesitancy comes in. And then if enough people don't get it, we can't get to that herd immunity, so we can't get to the point where enough of us have the immunity built up so we can get on with our lives, at least the next near normal situation that we can get to during this pandemic. That having been said, the manufacturers now have stepped in and said, okay, we're going to do this. 9 of the manufacturers signed a pledge saying, we want to make sure that this vaccine is safe and effective, meets the emergency use authorization criteria at the end of, through phase 3 trials. Those are large human trials. And if it gets to that point, then we'll seek emergency use authorization, but not until we have sufficient data. One CEO went so far as to say, I want this data made public so outside experts can look at it and they can validate its safety and its effectiveness. And that way we all have an understanding of how safe and effective it is before we move forward for this emergency use authorization. The other CEOs haven't necessarily followed suit on the transparency part, but they did sign this pledge saying they want to make it safe and effective. They want to be sure themselves it's safe and effective before they move forward to try and get the emergency use authorization. So hopefully that helps people get a little more confidence in the vaccine, and we'll certainly know more as the months go on. This is early September. They're talking October, November is when they're going to start getting information off of phase 3 trials, and we'll have a better understanding of the safety and effectiveness of the vaccine. Hopefully, they start opening up that data, because transparency is key here. And these companies, these pharmaceutical companies, have typically been very, very close about guarding their secrets to their vaccines, to their drugs, for proprietary reasons. And so opening it up could be one of those things that could provide transparency across the spectrum, across the nation, and across the globe. Now, these companies were U.S. companies that are also manufacturing or have manufacturers in Canada and Europe. These were not the Russia or the China vaccine. Those are different vaccines. And as you know, Russia has already given their vaccine their equivalent of emergency use authorization, and they're starting giving it to people. The concern there is it hasn't gone through phase 3. As a matter of fact, the Russia vaccine showed good antibody response, but it was good antibody response in what's essentially the equivalent of a phase 1 trial, a very early trial. They did 2 groups of 38 people, found good antibody response, did not use placebo controls. In other words, they didn't split them in half getting the vaccine, half getting the placebo to see what that would do. And just because they have antibody response doesn't mean they're actually protected from the virus. So what's happening in the U.S. trials, just to give you a little understanding, is they do it in these phase 3 trials. 30,000 people, 15,000 or so will get the vaccine, 15,000 or so will get a placebo or a different vaccine to a different virus, and then they'll monitor those people to see if they actually get the virus. If they get the virus, do they develop COVID-19 symptoms? If they get those, are they less severe than those who got the placebo? Are they less likely to get the virus than those who got the placebo? And that's how they know it's going to be effective. Then they'll look at the safety, make sure what the side effects are, get a good tally on that so we understand the safety behind it. Once the safety and effectiveness is understood, they'll seek this emergency use authorization. At least that's what they're saying in their pledge. And then we'll have a better understanding of how safe it is, effective it is for the rest of us. So that's the vaccine. Going over coronavirus cases real quickly here, 6.3 million, that's the latest number of cases. And as we all understand, the cases are dependent obviously on testing. The more you test, the more you are going to find. But we also find a positivity rate has increased as well in some areas. And so that tells us it's more than just testing that are behind those numbers. But the other telltale sign are the deaths. And unfortunately, we've gotten up to 190,000 deaths also with coronavirus, which is following some of the projections that were made early on. Some of those projections now are showing well over 200,000 deaths by the end of the year. We hope not. We hope that this doesn't come back with a big vengeance, the coronavirus come fall, come the next couple of months, and that people don't revert to old behaviors of not wearing masks, not social distancing, so we can get this under control. We've been, if you think about it, February is about the time we started hearing about it. It's September, so February, March, April, May, June, July, August. So 8 months in to this virus right now and how it's been affecting us in our lives. I think we still have a little bit of ways to go. There is a bit of a light at the end of the tunnel, especially with the vaccine being developed, but we'll see what happens there with time. Now, the other thing I want to talk about, the flu. You might have heard the term twindemic, and what they're talking about with twindemic is the fact that, yes, we're in the midst of a coronavirus pandemic, but the flu is still coming like we know it's going to come during the winter months. With the flu coming in the winter months, the coronavirus pandemic probably picking up in the winter months because that's what viruses do and how they behave, then more than likely we're going to have these two things hitting at once. Well, there's only one of these you can actually do something about right now, and that's the flu. You can get the flu vaccine. And as a matter of fact, the American Academy of Pediatrics just came out with a statement saying they want to make sure kids 6 months and above get the vaccine. There's this year the nasal spray and the injectable vaccine, and they're saying both are equivalent. If you remember in the past, the nasal spray had some issues. This year they're saying they're both equivalent. Most of the vaccines are going to be what we call quadrivalent, meaning they have 4 strains, 2 A strains and 2 B strains in there. So they're going to have 4 strains, which means they're going to cover what we think will happen here flu-wise. Granted, at this point, it's a very educated guessing game as to what flu strains will be here and whether those strains will change. But regardless, the flu vaccine does give you some protection from getting the flu, but more importantly, it gives you protection from getting complications of the flu, and it helps prevent you from dying from the flu. And so again, it's important to get for a couple reasons. One, when you get the flu, your immune system gets suppressed, coronavirus can move in, you can suffer more complications from coronavirus. 2, if people get the flu, they start flooding the emergency rooms, they start flooding the hospitals. We could have a repeat of what happened in April with the flu on top of that, which could really inundate our healthcare system. So to help everybody else out, please get the flu vaccine. It's not too late, it's not too early to get it right now. You want to get it, some experts say by the end of November, most experts say by the end of October, because it'll be here in time for the flu season and it'll last throughout the flu season itself. So again, getting that flu shot is important. And the American Academy of Pediatrics did make a mention of the fact that last year was one of the worst flu seasons we had for kids. They had 188 children die from the flu, which is tying a record that nobody wants to tie, but it's tying a record of the most flu deaths in children in a non-pandemic year. And so, again, not a record we want to repeat this year. So something definitely to think about. So going over the topics real quick, we talked about the vaccine, how these 9 companies have pledged to not ask for emergency use authorization until they're sure of the safety and effectiveness of the vaccine. Some are saying, well, let's go one step further and open up the data so everybody understands this, because this is a global problem. This is something that we need to make sure that we have a good understanding so people will actually get the vaccine Number two, the numbers, 6.3 million cases, 190,000 plus deaths from coronavirus to date so far here in the U.S. And then the flu. It's going to be making a comeback here like it does every winter. Getting your vaccine can certainly help out. Now, granted, with the flu, doing the things we're doing for coronavirus, wearing masks, social distancing, washing our hands can certainly help with this, but we don't know how much it's going to help, and we don't know if, in fact, it's going to keep it under control. So getting that vaccine is a further step you can take. Let me see if you have any questions.
Do asymptomatic people have stronger immune systems?
So the question is, do asymptomatic people have stronger immune systems? Not necessarily. So here's the way viruses work. It depends on a couple things. One, it definitely depends on your immune system and how well your immune system can fight it off. This coronavirus is novel, meaning we've never seen it before. Our bodies have never seen it, so our immune system can't react to this specific coronavirus. But there is some thinking, some speculation, that if you're exposed to other coronaviruses in the past, you might have enough of a defense built up that you can actually fight it off, and that's why you're asymptomatic. That's one way that you don't have the symptoms. And so that's definitely not necessarily an overall stronger immune system, but an immune system that can specifically target this coronavirus. On top of that, it also depends on viral load. So if you're exposed to somebody and you go through a room that somebody happened to be in a minute before you, they're coughing and sneezing, the virus is still floating around a little bit, then you get a small viral load. Your body can fight that off a lot easier than it can if, let's say, you're a healthcare worker and you're directly in the face of coronavirus patients day after day after day. You're going to get a huge viral load. So you can imagine if somebody coughs or sneezes in your face, that virus, a huge amount of that's going to get into your mouth or your nose, versus if you're further away from somebody and just a little bit gets there because they're talking or they're breathing. If just a little bit gets into your body can fight it off better. If a large amount gets into it, then you're probably not going to fight it off as well. You'll probably develop symptoms. So asymptomatic people don't necessarily have a stronger immune system. They could, but it also could be dependent on how much virus they're exposed to. And that's why we're saying it's so important to wear a mask, to social distance, to wash your hands, open windows to ventilate, because that can decrease that viral load, which also decreases your chances of getting the virus and getting complications from the virus.
Should you take the COVID-19 vaccine if you've already had COVID-19?
And that's a question I think is going to come up more and more. Should you get the vaccine, the COVID-19 vaccine, the coronavirus vaccine, if you've already had COVID-19? The answer is going to be yes. We're going to have to vaccinate just about everybody because, number one, we don't know how long these antibodies are going to last. We also don't know what kind of antibodies your body is developing when you got the coronavirus. With the vaccine, they're going to be looking at the antibodies to see if you're developing regular antibodies, what we call IgG antibodies, or you're developing these T-cell antibodies, which are kind of the sentinel memory antibodies for your body, for your immune system. The vaccines some of them look like they're doing that, which is good. But on top of that, again, talking about the viral load, we don't know how much of the virus you got. We don't know how many antibodies you built up from it. With the vaccine, we have a better understanding of the standards that will be used to develop that vaccine, the dosing on the vaccine, and what it does to your body. And so even though you had COVID-19, you're probably still going to need the vaccine.
How many people die from the flu every year?
So the question is, how many people die from the flu every year? Averages around 50 to 80,000 people die from the flu every year. The estimates are that there are many people, many more people, hundreds of thousands of people that get hospitalized, that get sick from, millions of people that get sick from the virus, from the flu virus. Deaths, again, 50, 80,000 in that range of people that die from the flu. Now, one of the reasons the deaths aren't as high now, remember, I think in last year they were saying around 50,000 died from the flu. 190,000 people so far have died from coronavirus. Well, one of the big reasons you're seeing it different than that, there's a couple reasons. One, again, I talked about the novel virus. Our body doesn't know how to fight this off, so it can get a hold in our body, and it can take hold, and it can certainly cause complications because of that. Two, our immune system, since it doesn't really recognize it, kind of goes into overdrive. And that immune system overdrive, if you've heard the term cytokine storm, can actually overwhelm our bodies as well and cause deaths there. With the flu, it's a little bit different. Since we have been exposed to the flu in the past, if you've been living on Earth, you've been exposed to flu at some point or another. Plus, if you've gotten the flu vaccine in the past, even though it might not perfectly match the strain this year, it's going to give you some protection from the strain this year. And so that can certainly help alleviate the deaths from coronavirus. And remember, from the flu. And remember, I talked about the flu itself. that even though the flu vaccine might not protect you from getting the flu, it can protect you from getting complications of the flu and can protect you from dying from the flu as well. And that's why it's so important.
Don't vaccines weaken your immune system over time?
So the question is, don't vaccines weaken your immune system over time? It's actually the opposite. The vaccines actually strengthen your immune system. If you think about your immune system, especially when we're kids, the more our immune system is worked out, the stronger our immune system gets. Think of it like a muscle. The more you use the muscle, the stronger that muscle gets. Well, the immune system is kind of like that too. So the more it's worked, the stronger it gets over time. When we're a kid, there's a thing called the hygiene hypothesis, that if your children are too clean, if they're too sanitary, if they're too sanitized, as in they're never allowed to play in dirt or play in mud or play outside where they get exposed to different allergens, then they're probably not going to have a strong immune system. And they think part of the issue with many more children having asthma or eczema or these types of immune system issues, they think that might come about because they don't necessarily play with animals like we did in the past. They don't necessarily play with dogs and cats as much as we did in the past. They don't play outside as much. And so that's one of the hypotheses, which shows that the immune system basically needs that workout. The same thing happens here when you get a vaccine. When you get a vaccine, what happens is your body, you don't get the virus for the most part. Think of the flu vaccine. You get either parts of the virus or specifically designed parts of the virus that are injected that kind of fools the immune system into thinking that the virus is there. Flu virus, for example. If the immune system thinks it's there, it's going to build up antibodies to it. So it's going to strengthen itself to fight off that specific virus. While it's doing that, it's going to be looking for other similar type viruses as well. So those vaccines actually, in addition to protecting you from that specific virus, actually help your immune system as well.
Do senior citizens and children have to take a stronger dose of the flu vaccine for their weight?
So the question is, do senior citizens and children have to take a stronger dose of the flu vaccine? Children, no. Children, the dosing is essentially the same, 6 months and above. Elderly, yes, 65 and above, there's a double dose vaccine that they typically take. The reason is because as we get to 65 and above, our immune system tends to weaken a bit. Because it's weakening, it can't mount that immune response to the vaccine, and so it needs a stronger vaccine in order to mount that immune response to give you the protection you need if the virus comes along and you do get that heavy viral load we were talking about. And that viral load is not just specific to coronavirus, it's to all viruses.
Have you heard of any outpatient treatment for COVID besides the vaccine?
So the question is, outpatient treatment for COVID besides the vaccine? No. There's been a lot of things touted over the months, hydroxychloroquine, different types of medicines and herbs and things out there. Nothing has been proven to work other than making sure your immune system is strong, staying as healthy as you can, protecting yourself with the 4 W's, wear a mask, watch your distance, wash your hands, and open your windows are important to keep you safe. But beyond that, it's just what I tell people: if you have coronavirus at home, symptoms are mild to moderate, you can tolerate them at home, especially if you're not having chest pain or breathing issues, then or any kind of neurological issues, then just do what you normally would do with cold and flu type symptoms, just over-the-counter medications that can certainly help out. But beyond that, I know one of the reasons behind the question possibly is because we know that steroids help, but they only help with critically ill patients. These are patients who are typically on ventilators, definitely in the hospital. You don't want to take steroids if you only have mild to moderate symptoms. The reason is steroids suppress your immune system. The reason they help in these critically ill patients is because the immune system, again, goes into overdrive, and that's one of the issues behind the complications and the deaths they have in some of them. So getting that immune system tamped down a little bit while they're fighting off coronavirus at the critically ill point is important. Keeping that immune system strong, mild to moderate symptoms is important, so you don't want to get steroids at that point. So do not take them at home. These are things to use only in a hospital setting. So again, nothing really at home to use other than cold and flu type of medications you can get over the counter, and keeping an eye on yourself. So thank you for the questions. They've all been wonderful. This is going to be a shorter week, so I hope you enjoy the week. But real quickly, the 3 news articles we talked about: the vaccine, the fact that 9 companies are pledging to look at the safety and efficacy, the effectiveness before they go for the emergency use authorization. Number 2, the deaths, over 190,000 deaths at this point, which is unfortunate. Hopefully with the winter coming here that we're able to get those behaviors down, the masks, the social distancing, the washing our hands, the opening windows even on cold days if you can, to try and get the virus under control, to make it so the deaths aren't much higher than they are right now. And then the flu vaccine. It's coming. You should be getting it right now. The flu will be here soon. American Academy of Pediatrics is putting a special message out there for children to get it in particular because of the amount of deaths last year, which was unfortunately a record year for deaths for children from the flu. So again, I hope you have a great week, a fantastic week, and please, above all, make sure you, your family, your loved ones stay as happy and as healthy as possible.